Oh, hey, one sec. How's it going, Planet Earth? Untamed Druid again. Here with another video. I actually recorded a different video, and that was supposed to be number 13. But I figured I'd do this one instead because that one was a little charged. So, this video is going to be on world religions. Okay, now it's just gonna be pretty basic at the beginning. I'm not gonna go into like what everybody believes and everything. Right now, I'm just gonna like name different ones that exist in different countries or different religions that exist in different countries. So, just so, just to put them out there so that they're little earworms, you know. So, if you have any interest, you can just kind of just look it up, you know. Um, So I'm gonna start just above China with the area of like Siberia, which is now Russia. Uh, they as recently as like 1450, I would say. I mean, obviously, there's still people there that practice it, but there's the religion of Tengriism, which is basically like shamanic initiation and rites and things like that. And then in China, there's the teachings of Confucius, which is generally what the state of China is established on. And then there's Taoism, which is, more of the esoteric elements of Eastern understanding. Um, in India, you got Buddha. He's actually from India. He's not from China. So yeah, so there's Buddhism, and then there's Hindus, which is just your basically folklore religion. It's pretty malleable polytheism. That's where India gets all of its claim to fame for having so many gods. It comes from Hinduism. Jainism is really an emphasis on. I believe they still worship some of the pantheon from Hinduism, but they practice more specifically veganism and nonviolence. And then there's also Sikhs. I'm less familiar with Sikhs, but I'm pretty sure they're more knowledge based. But what I remember is that they're like insignia or something is like crossed swords. So I'm not sure if they're as anti-violent, but I'm pretty sure they're like an intellectual group. I'm not 100% sure on that. Um, but yeah, and then once you move over to Persia slash just sort of the Middle East, what we would call the Middle East here in America. You got Zoroastrianism, which is essentially fire worship, but it's a pretty close precursor for Christianity for any Christians listening or just people interested. And then once you move over to Turkey slash Armenia, you've got Sibyllism, which is they worshipped Sibyl, which was the name of their god. It's sort of like mother worship or female worship. And then Chaldeism, which was, or I don't know if you need the ism, but Chaldic in Armenia, that was the name of their pantheon, and the Chaldee was the chief deity. And then there's Astarte, or basically astrology. That was supposedly, started in Turkey, but astrology was pretty much practiced everywhere. And then once you continue west, you get to Greece, and they had general Hellenism, which was just the classic Greek pantheon that we think of if you think of Greece. And then also the thing about Rome was that they were worshiping the same gods that they were worshiping in Greece, and they just renamed them. They just literally took them, the exact models of the gods, and just changed the names and just turned them into Latin names instead of Greek names, and that was the difference. So basically, Rome and Greece pretty early on were worshiping the same deities. Rome, of course, switched to Roman Catholicism later. So, yeah. Now, once you go a little south and east, along the Gaza Strip, you've got the Canaanites and the Jews, and that's where the Phoenicians were and everything too, and that's like the Syrian area in Lebanon. Yeah, so the Canaanites were the people that were originally in the land of Jerusalem, and the Jewish nomads established their state in the land of Canaan. So there were basically already people living there, and then Jerusalem was established, but we don't have to go too far into that. Now, as far as Buddhism goes, this is based on a a rough understanding. So it's not, I'm not a practicing Buddhist. This is the culmination of me just doing some light investigating into these things. In southern Asia, like Laos and Thailand and or not Thailand, but Myanmar and Vietnam, there was Theravada Buddhism, which is more of the church aspects, more of the clerical established church type of religion when it comes to Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism, which is the biggest, and it's just classic, just like listen to Buddha, and there's no real focus on monastic duties. And then the other aspect, it's Mahayana is kind of the one second silly trains. Anyway, so yeah, Mahayana is generally what you might think of as like the middle path, just to keep to use similar phrases with just the ideas of like Buddhism or Taoism or just Eastern religion in general. Mahayana is probably more of the middle path between the monastic duties of Buddhist state and then like the tantric elements, which would come from Tibet and that region. Yeah, so monastic is like the literal, like I work at the church and I'm the priest type person, and then the tantric is like the metaphysical / somatic intelligence kind of aspects of Buddhism. It's also called Lamaism, so that's where the Dalai Lama gets his Lama from. So I just have these written down, by the way. This is just me writing all of this information down. I'm not reading from something. I just reading what I wrote. Yeah, and then so what was the last one that I did? So South Asia, yeah, and then I didn't really go into like the Philippines and stuff. But there's also there's animism. That was basically the base religion for most like tribes and uncivilized peoples. They just worship the animals and the spirits that resided in them and that they represented. So they would represent different aspects of the spirit based on their physical characteristics, and that's where they formed their original understanding of the different attributes of the greater spirit. So animism is a pretty big one. Basically anywhere that was less involved in like the main kind of civilizations that you might think of, like not Africa, well, sort of Africa, and also like Australia and Polynesia and stuff. But Polynesians had their own religion. I didn't get that one down, but yeah, in France and Britain, it was mostly like druidic practices, and this is like around 0, like, or 300 BC, I think. Um, it was mostly just druids, and then of course later, like 1500 years later, everybody's Catholic. So, um, and yeah, again, like 300 BC in Germany, there was Tuistic, or the German pantheon, which was Tui was the top deity. And then there was also elements of mother worship, but that kind of goes hand in hand with pantheism. So, and then in Spain, there was more of a pantheistic druidism. So they had kind of their own unique gods, but so they kind of stand off against what you might call like classic druids. But even there, these are all just distinctions, and that's kind of what the video is going to be about. But yeah, so and then I'm going to go into a little bit more of the mystical history, the alternative history. We're always talking about alternative things here. So, in Africa, you have your traditionalist, like fetishist religion, which is just they like worshipped idols. But again, that's generally a corruption of like the white people that went there and misinterpreted what was going on, and they were worshiping what the idols' characteristics stood for. So a lot of the uncivilized claims of people from Africa was just the white people not being able to understand what they were seeing, and just misinterpreting it in a way where they assumed they were obviously different because they had different skin color. So yeah, basically just different languages, different customs, and not being able to communicate. So because they didn't have buildings and weren't hiding from everything, they were seen as uncivilized instead of badasses who could do that. So and Africa is kind of still in the ritualism, just ritualized practice. That's kind of goes hand in hand with the fetishism. And fetishism is not even the best word, so word for it. It's kind of archaic. But and then I'm also including in Africa Lemuria, which is the other lost continent, along with Atlantis. So Lemuria is where, I believe I have the story right, Lemuria is where all humans are from, and that's the genealogical relation that people have. Like, all people came from black people, as the story goes, but that's because we're all from Lemuria. And then basically the Anunnaki from the Babylonian creation epic lived in Atlantis. So that's where they came from. So yeah. Oh yeah, you just got your Catholicism that still exists today. But then you got your Protestants. I didn't do all the different denominations, but the Protestants, the idea behind the Protestants was that they were protesting against the entire establishment of the church, because the Roman Catholic Church extended from Spain to Sweden to it basically went to Russia, and Russia was more Orthodox Christianity, but it's from Spain to Russia, all the same religion, kind of focused around the same central figure, which was the Pope. Yeah, and Protestantism was the people saying, hey, we're not going to just allow everything to be centralized around the Pope. People were starting to become literate and able to read the Bible for the first time, and once they were actually able to read it, they started protesting against being controlled by a centralized government or what have you. And then in Atlantis, the Atlantic or Atlantean religion was largely druidic, sun worship, knowledge about trees, knowledge about nature. They really incorporated sacrifices of fruits and flowers, I believe. I believe that's also in what the Aztecs' original religion was before they start sacrificing people. And I think this is from Ignatius Donnelly's Atlantis book. I believe he said that they only started sacrificing people after the Spanish came, but I'm not sure about that. But that would be, it's like it was, yeah, they were sacrificing, the fruits of their labor until the white man came, and then they started killing each other through the corruption that the white man brought. So that's a little bit of what the video is supposed to be about. About to go into it pretty deep here. To finish off, in like the Incas in South America, they practiced Inti, or sun worship. Inti was the name of their sun god. The Aztecs had their own religion called Nahuatl, and then the Atl at the end was Ignatius Donnelly's connection. Nahuatl was connected to Atlantis, Nahuatlantis, and then again for Ignatius Donnelly, Atlantis was a combination of Atl, which was water, and then Antis, which was copper, and they were the civilization that was dispersing copper to all the different civilizations. So that's the South American connection to the Atlanteans, because most people, it's understood that the Atlanteans went to Europe, but again, in Ignatius Donnelly's book, he's citing many learned people of the time that are studying South America and making these connections. So he's really pointing out other people's work. So he's pointing out even older work, or some kind of contemporaries to him, but it's like 1890s, so it's still pretty old. But yeah, he's pointing to people who are saying that the language they were speaking in South America can be translated into the hieroglyphics that the Egyptians were using, almost at the exact same time. So that's a really interesting book. I would definitely recommend that. And then from there, Helena Blavatsky and The Secret Doctrine, and there's you can, just looking at those two books alone, you can find other books that those writers reference, and it's really just having the courage to, even though they're these old books and you don't know them, just believe that you can discern what's obviously true and what's obviously false. Just give yourself that power. Okay, so at this point, I wanted to talk about how I just listed a bunch of different religions all across the world. That's not nearly, all of them. There's other ones that I don't know anything about, like the Polynesian religion, and I didn't mention Shinto. I didn't mention, there's even more religions. This is just there's all these different names, right? And there's all these different figures and forms. The Druids are worshiping the sun, and they probably had a Druidic word or whatever language word for the sun, and then in South America they were calling it Inti, so there's all these apparent differences, right? There's all of these religions all across the world, basically everywhere, anywhere that's a group of people that exists, they have some kind of religious practice that they practice, So we can see that religion of some sort is worldwide. There's just religion everywhere. There's people that are practicing different practices worldwide, and they essentially align with each other. The differences that exist are kind of reducible to culture and difference in language and maybe geographical situation of the given country that the religion's located in. So I'll just read what I have written so I'm not jumping around. The idea of separate world religions is a manifestation of our disconnect with life in general. Before getting into specifics, simply the idea of people developing entirely unrelated religious systems, okay, just completely unrelated without having anything to do with one another, it's not possible, right? Because we exist in the same conditions. We all exist in the world, right? So there's no way for us to be talking about different things because we all exist within the same set of conditions. You can think about it as a math problem, but you know, we all are faced with the same reality. So there's only so many manifestations of a religion that can happen unless you start assuming. Now I'm gonna keep reading here, but unless you start assuming that different physical characters, right, or different physical manifestations are actually different from one another. That's when all the religions are different, and none of them are, you know, decipherable to anybody that's not studying it, and so materialism basically. So I'll continue here. It's not possible. So we all exist in the same conditions. South American Inti worship, while different in process and names of the different pantheons and stuff, is no different than Hellenic Apollo worship. So in Greece, they're worshiping Apollo. Or see, and that might be the Roman name. Whatever, the sun god of the Hellenic pantheon is the same as the sun god of the Inti pantheon, simply because they represent the same physical thing, right? So it's like there's different stories, and they're opposing, you know, they're not the same, they're not from the same place. You know, why would they be the same? Because they serve the same role, they do the same thing, they are the same entity. They're just different names because of culture and where we're coming from. So they are literally the same. There's no difference. So there's really about, you know, I would say there's three different types of religion: where you're worshiping a physical object, where you're worshiping thoughts, and then where you're worshiping your own ability. But anyway, yeah, so Inti worship isn't different than Apollo worship. All imposed differences only exist on the lowest or physical level. And yeah, I say this not to, you know, upset people. But, you know, it's necessary to make this apparent, you know, to point out how any conflict over religion, like if it's specifically because of religion, is not just, right? Because it's about religion and we're all practicing the exact same thing. You know, we're just like, no, it's called this. No, this is what it's called. And it's like, who cares what it's called? We're all doing the same thing. You know, like any distinction is rather pedantic. You know, it's like, yeah, you call it this and I call it this. It's the same thing. The more we keep trying to have a preference one over the other, you know, the more likely people are to be violent about it. And that doesn't mean that it makes sense. It's just the more hardline people are, the more likely they are to be violent, even though there's nothing to be violent about, because we're essentially all practicing the same processes, you know. Now, let me just keep reading. Yeah, so understandably, the necessity of culture and tradition in civilization leads to the establishment of these differences. So, you know, it's not that, you know, it's not a fault of people. It's just a thing that happens because of how culture exists. Like, the culture requires you to have your own language and to have your own, like, set of religious beliefs so that you identify with being where you're from. So then they create this own culture that, you know, makes all of these apparent differences appear. So if we can then, because of all of what I've just said, if we can agree that all religion is used for the same reason, or employed for the same reasons, regardless of who or where. So, the world over, everybody's practicing religious practices for the same reasons, right? There's only so much variation between individual people as far as the reasons that they're participating in religious belief, is more of what I'm saying. So if all religions are used for the same reasons, regardless of who or where the person or the practitioner is located, we find ourselves on a different level than I think when you start watching this video, unless you already knew all of this. We're now seeing that all of the religions that exist serve the same function, and they do the exact same thing. And what is that thing that they do? Well, so the purpose of religion on its grandest scale is to establish hierarchy of importance, which is just a valuing system, and to codify the creation / the existence of the state. So this is made clear in the biblical stories which parallel the creation of Israel to the creation of Judaism. They were almost tantamount. They were almost not tantamount. They were almost at the exact same time. God said to Abraham, "You will live in this land, and this land will be yours, and you will form a religion," and all of that stuff. And then he did that, and then the religion formed. So the creation of the state of Israel happened at the exact same time that Judaism was created. Now, that being the case, then this is just rough, just a rough overview, just a rough overgo. So if that's true, then we can see that the establishment of government, or the establishment of religion, is the establishment of government. And government comes from the Greek govern, which means to dictate or control, and then ment is mind, so mind control. And then, if you accept that the establishment of religion is the establishment of government, there's a new distinction just made, because most people won't even, get this far. So, religious practitioners, again, may disagree, claiming that the religion is about establishing a means of communing with God, or Geist, or nature, or whatever the religion is saying. You have to be a practitioner, and you have to worship. You have to go to the priest, because that's how you are able to speak to God. That's almost generally imposed. It might be more of a monotheistic thing that happens instead of in polytheism, what these people are, the people that think that they need to have the priest, and they need to have the teacher, and they need to have the judge or the juror or the police officer. What these people fail to realize is that our own personal existence, just us, me existing, you existing, is a personal communion with God. Like, just us existing by ourselves. We don't need some other third party to say, "Hey, I am the one who speaks to God, and you're just a piece of shit." We don't need that. That's all made up. Because of what I just said, the government or the mind control. So, so generally monotheistic, I'll say monotheistic. It's probably, to an extent, all of these religious different practices, like the world over, generally serve to break, weaken, or tamp out our natural connection to our own abilities and encourage us to default to the superiority of the state. That's just a thing that happens. Yeah, so it's really up to us to find the true teachings. You know, you can't go to anything that's established and just listen to what they're telling you, because, you know, they're, again, government. Now, if we agree to a singularity of religious systems, we can see how differing views come from the lack of understanding of the singularity of systems numerology in general, as well as from literalism or materialism. According to just a general, you know, this is a pretty rough overgo, but Atlantis and its sun druids worshipped the intent of existence. You know, so, you know, their sun druids are worshipping, you know, the sun and all of these things, but these weren't animals, people. You know, these were very intelligent people, and if you believe like the Babylonian creation story and everything, and you think that they are the fallen angels, you know, they are the Anunnaki, then these are, you know, alien people that lived on Earth, and were dispersing culture to all of basically the world that we think of. Yeah, so that's what they did in Atlantis. And the Lemurians, which is the southern lost continent, that's the home of the people of Africa and India, and basically, yeah. See, this is where it gets weird, because it just depends on how much time passed. But to think that all people came from Lemuria, and then the interbreeding with the Anunnaki turned white people white, you know, because I wouldn't say that I'm an Anunnaki, you know, so that's where it gets a little weird. I according to what my mind is telling me, I remember that it said that all humans came from Lemuria, so that's, yeah, you know, that might be up for debate, but, and in Lemuria, they did more of the tantric elements of religion, and they worshipped the moon. So these religious systems both existed at the same time. Neither one of them was corrupt, and they established the basis for basically all religious practices which we now practice. So all of these different religious practices the world over can be boiled down to the human abode, the original human abode, where we worship the moon, which represents the mother, and, you know, basically the body. And then the Atlanteans, the Anunnaki, worshipped this source of life and worshipped the fact that life happened at all. Basically, they didn't take anything for granted, and understood that there was something that made this world. So that's what they were praying to. And so you can see kind of that polarity starting to show its head, where, you know, there's people praising intent and, you know, something that's pretty invisible, and then there's people that are praising the physical moon and the physical body, you know. So there's this polarization that's going on. So after the corruption and destruction of these ancient lands, the disgraced rulers were displaced over what we now call the Old World. The corruption of these rulers bled into our understanding of religion, so that so that in the now times, materialists believe a completely different thing than an esoteric person. So esotericism, at its simplest, can be thought of as advanced reading. So when you read a book, there's basically two levels of comprehension. I'm going to go over what exoteric is. Exoteric or materialist interpretation is one that assumes nothing is hidden or implied and takes all words for their literal or physical counterpart. So that's what it means to be exoteric or materialist. And an esoteric understanding is like when you read something, that's where you get your metaphors, your allegories, and where the secrets are located, depending on what book you're reading. So the esoteric esoteric understanding sees what's being said in a book as a representation of higher ideals based on the characteristics of what is involved. So it's really abstract, and they're still going to use physical characters, and they're still going to be, you know, it, basically the Bible is a good example. You can read the Bible and you can read it esoterically, or you can read it exoterically. And both are totally, you're reading the same thing, and people leave with completely different understandings of what was communicated, because you either read the Bible and it's got these dragons and these beasts and these, there's giants, and we gotta, like, it's this crazy, wild, like, obviously fantasy story that you're supposed to take serious because it's your religion, or you esoterically understand it, and now there is no boogeyman, there's no giants there. What does the giant represent? What is the concept of a giant? And you can take it that way too. I like to fuse literalism and esoteric understanding, just because I don't know what's possible, and maybe there were giants, and maybe, so I don't want to limit what I'm willing to accept. I'm just willing to make sure I fully examine something before I put it in my mouth. Thus, science, or the modern religion of materialists, denies what cannot be empirically proven until they can empirically prove it, and then they claim ownership of that information, which is the fucking worst. All of this while most scientific institutions are government-backed, meaning that the government, again, mind control, holds all scientific knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and legal knowledge. Because scientific knowledge, they own science. Religious knowledge, the original government was religion. And then legal knowledge, through the establishment of this separate government that has nothing to do with science and has nothing to do with religion. There is now a trifecta of government influence in our lives. You default to legal knowledge to the state. You default to the church for spiritual knowledge. You default to science to tell you how the world works. And they don't know how it works, because they can't explain why we exist in the first place. They have no explanation for it. They have a bunch of highfalutin theories, which is as much as basically anybody's got. So, right, they aren't the czars. They aren't, they aren't in charge. They don't know anything more than anybody else does. They just have a bunch of words memorized. And that makes them think that they're actually smarter or more important than someone else, willing enough to stop them from living their life and force potentially genetically altering things onto people, without having any consciousness about it, because you just have to listen to me because I know more than you. And I'm saying it's okay. If you question me at all, you're a kook. And even if something bad happens because I forced this on you, well, science isn't perfect. Yeah, so this triple government is the Cerberus, which blocks our entrance to the gates of hell, where the uncorrupted interpretation of self and existence is located. But that's for a different time. And again, because of this triple government, we can now see that any established information is, so write down the word information and then space between the in and the formation. Established information is you being in formation. Or we can just say that it's not genuine, and it's pointing towards what is established as the answers to all quandary, as opposed to pointing towards the miracle of self. Yeah, so I'm gonna end this video there. But really, I don't want to leave anybody discouraged, but really encourage you to understand that it's up to you to live your life, and watching me, watching whoever you like to watch, drinking whatever you like to drink, is less important than you expressing yourself. If you had all the money in the world but you couldn't express yourself, again, I made this reference in a different video, but everybody would be Kurt Cobain, because when you have everything but you can't tell people what you know to be true, there's not much here for you, if you're not expressing yourself. It's a pretty lonely place, and I know everybody knows that, so you don't need to hear me say it, but just trying to encourage people to believe in themselves and believe in their own interpretations and own understanding of things, because that's where your power lies. So even if you're wrong about everything, just have the confidence to believe that you can be right and accept when you're wrong. Anything besides that is just policing ourselves, and that's not necessary. So yeah, have a good one. Hit that like button if you like the video. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you want to subscribe. Hit the notification bell, and I will catch you guys next time.